First, let's look at Portland State going to Montana State. The Vikings are looking to pick up their first win of the season, while the Bobcats are looking to bounce back after a respectable loss to nationally ranked Weber State. Portland is questioning who's going to be the quarterback after 3 losses with Jelani Eason running the offense and then Josh Kraut having more success with the same offense. The wide receiver / quarterback had 249 passing yards with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions plus 132 rushing yards. The Bobcats should fare well in this contest. They have a strong enough defense to contain an offense that hasn't found its identity yet. Chris Murray is going to need his 4th 100-plus yard rushing day in a row and make more connections like the 64-yard touchdown pass he had for Lance McTutchin. Northern Colorado travels to North Dakota. The Bears have a tough defense and an even tougher schedule, while the Fighting Hawks are fighting off injuries. The Bears are going to need more than 20 points because John Santiago is going to find holes or make holes. Brady Oliveira is going to catch and run. And even if that doesn't work, Keaton Strudsrud has been sneaking around all season long. Also, the Bears have to win the battle for turnovers. North Dakota doesn't have Cole Reyes, so if Jacob Knipp throws an interception and Colin Root misses anything, it's going to be an uphill battle. Montana at Idaho State. Both teams have very strong ground games, and the Bengals' James Madison had 20 carries, which opens up the field for the tandem of wide receivers Michael Dean and Mitch Guller, who have over 120 yards each and 3 touchdowns combined. The Grizzlies have a mobile quarterback in Jeremy Calhoun, who had another 2-touchdown rushing day against the Vikings. But they will need to have their defense push down the Bengals offense. The Grizzlies have, for the year, 9 interceptions and 3 touchdowns on the defense this week alone. Stay strong, Justin Strong. In the Big Sky Missouri Valley Challenge, the number 11 Illinois State Redbirds will visit Northern Arizona. The Lumberjacks did really well against the Bears and doubled up the scoreboard. Case Cookus is getting lots of help. Over 400 total offensive yards for 3 of 4 games. The defense is forcing turnovers and special teams are putting up points. Right now, their only real vulnerable spot is kicking and the stopping of the run, and even that is pretty good. The Lumberjacks are going to have to put pressure on quarterback Jake Colby and have some extra attention on wide receiver Christian Gibbs. They ran the exact same play twice last week. Cal Poly at Southern Utah features a team looking for a conference win hosting a team looking for any win. After Cal Poly's great start last year, they can't seem to get into the win column. Without Joe Prothro, it seems like quarterback Khalil Jenkins will also have to start being his own running back. If he picks up another 202 rushing while connecting with Kyle Lewis, it should be a strong outing. The Thunderbirds have been showing off running back James Falilla posting back-to-back rushing scores, and cornerback Jermaine Dobbs Jr. is going to make Khalil Jenkins think interception or run. And finally, the co-conference champion and number 10 according to FCS stats, Eastern Washington Eagles go to UC Davis. Look for Offensive Player of the Week, Gage Goodrud, to find points. The Eagles quarterback went 35 for 50 this week with 447 passing yards, 486 total, including 5 scores in the air and 1 on the ground. UC Davis' Jake Meyer had 415 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, plus his wide receiver Keelan Doss grabbed 11 receptions for 199 yards. Both of these teams have streaking offenses right now, mainly because their quarterbacks are number 3 and 4 in passing throughout FCS. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Anthony Crescenzo.
Another electric week in the Colonial Athletic Association. Things are really starting to shape up. Taking our first look at the conference standings, Stony Brook is alone at the top at 3-0. James Madison, Elon, and New Hampshire are all 2-0. Albany and Villanova are 1-1. Delaware, Richmond, and William and Mary are all 0-1. And finishing up at the bottom, Towson, Maine, and Rhode Island are 0-2. We're going to kick this off with the battle of Conference Cinderellas, where number 23 Elon won a defensive struggle against number 19 Albany 6-0. Tyler Campbell forced 2 of the 4 Phoenix turnovers with 2 interceptions on the game, and kicker Owen Johnson provided all the offense in this one, drilling 2 field goals. That is Elon's 4th straight win and 3rd straight against a ranked opponent. They'll look to keep it rolling when they take on the Tribe, who are coming off a tough loss to Stony Brook. Albany's stellar defense was led by Nate Hadalaski, who finished with 12 tackles, 2 for a loss. The Great Danes have another tough one next week on the road against 16th-ranked Richmond, who's coming off a bye. Rhode Island played the only out-of-conference game last week when they lost to Brown 24-21 in a tight one. The Rams wasted a nice performance from quarterback Tyler Harris, who threw for 298 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Rams gave up 21 straight points in the second half and were never able to recover. 14th-ranked Villanova cruised past Towson 24-9, even with the opening drive injury to quarterback Zach Bednarchik. While backup quarterback Jack Skedelich struggled, throwing 3 interceptions, he did run for a pair of touchdowns in the fourth quarter to catapult Villanova to victory. Bednarchik looked to have injured his knee and was on crutches for the rest of the game, so the Wildcats may be without him for some time. Skedelich will look to be better through the air next week when they take on Maine, who had their game against UCF canceled due to a conference makeup game for the Knights that was postponed due to Hurricane Irma. Towson will head into the bye before taking on 16th-ranked Richmond the following week. 15th-ranked New Hampshire blew out Bryant 45-17. Wide receiver Neil O'Connor dominated on the outside with 154 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rick Ellison got the defense on the board with a 50-yard pick 6. New Hampshire will also go into a bye week before taking on Stony Brook. Stony Brook was able to outlast William and Mary 21-18. Running back Stacy Bedell ran for 104 yards and a touchdown, helping the Seawolves jump out to a 21-0 lead. Running back Nate Evans helped the Tribe storm back to within 3, gaining 162 yards from scrimmage and punching one into the end zone. William and Mary have another tough one next week against 23rd-ranked Elon. Stony Brook will look to keep it rolling against Delaware, who lost a tough one to James Madison. Speaking of James Madison and UDel, the Dukes took down the Blue Hens 20-10 in an absolute battle. Running back Trey Sharp ran for a career-high 185 yards and a touchdown for JMU. The defense helped the cause, forcing 3 turnovers and returning one of those for 6. They have now tied the CAA record with 17 straight wins and will look to break the record after their much-deserved bye week. They will look to get number 18 against Villanova at home. Delaware's Troy Reeder led the way for the defense with 12 tackles and an interception and a solid performance against the nation's top-ranked team. They'll look to bounce back against Stony Brook next week, as I mentioned earlier. For your conference Whiparound, I'm Ryan Griffith. Good luck to all the CAA teams this weekend.
After 83 consecutive weeks with a nationally ranked football member, the Big South has fallen out of the top 25 polls for the first time since Week 8 of the 2011 season. Although no teams are ranked, 4 of the 6 teams received top 25 votes, according to the Stats FCS poll. 5 of the 6 teams are in action in Week 6, the final week before conference play kicks off. 1 school hosts a Division II opponent, 3 play FCS schools, and 1 looks to pick up the Big South's second ever win against an FCS school. Let's see what each school is up to this week. After scoring 49.3 points and averaging 536 yards per game in 3 wins to start the season, the once dominant Liberty Flames offense has scored just 17 points combined in back-to-back losses. The most recent was a 13-7 defeat at the hands of St. Francis. The loss knocked Liberty from number 22 out of the Stats FCS top 25. The Flames didn't find the end zone in that one until the final minutes to avoid a shutout. While the offense has struggled, the Liberty defense had its best performance of 2017, holding the Red Flash to just 13 points after allowing over 33 points per game coming into the week. They also tallied 4 sacks after collecting just 2 through the first 4 games. The Flames are idle this week as they prepare for their conference opener versus Kennesaw State on October 14th. The Gardner-Webb Runnin' Bulldogs are fresh off their bye and ready to pick up win number 1. This week, they will host Division II's Shorter University, who also comes in winless. The Runnin' Bulldogs are hoping to avoid their first 0-5 start since 2012. The Hawks come in to this week averaging just 13 points per contest, which is good for a Gardner-Webb defense that ranks near the bottom of the FCS, giving up over 35 points per game. On the offensive side, it's going to have to be all Tyrell Maxwell for the Runnin' Bulldogs. The senior quarterback, who is the preseason Big South Player of the Year and a Walter Payton Award candidate, is the team's leading passer and rusher, as well as the conference's active rushing leader. The Presbyterian Blue Hose were blown out at home on Saturday by number 7 Wofford, 31-7, ending their brief 2-game winning streak. The loss dropped their record to 2-3, and in all 3 losses, the Blue Hose have scored exactly 7 points. Presbyterian is 2-2 on their current 7-game homestand and will play 3-1 St. Francis University this week. The Red Flash knocked off a ranked Big South opponent last week, and they have the 19th best defense in the FCS against a Presbyterian offense that hasn't been consistent. To pull off the upset, junior QB Ben Cheek is going to have to make smart decisions with the football. He's been good through the air recently, completing 38 passes for 420 yards in his last 3 games. But if that doesn't work, he has 2 stud freshman running backs in the backfield, Torrance Marble and Mark Robinson, to hand the ball off to. On the other side of the ball, the Blue Hose defense is going to have to be better than it was against Wofford. It starts with redshirt freshman KJ Presley, who had 3.5 tackles for a loss last week up front, and senior linebacker Grant Beidel, whose 58 tackles lead the Big South and ranked 5th nationally. The Kennesaw State Owls survived a scare from Division II North Greenville University last Saturday, thanks to junior quarterback Chandler Burks, who found the end zone on a keeper with 16 seconds left to give the Owls a 38-34 win. Burks threw for 100 yards and a touchdown and added 100 yards and 2 scores on the ground, including the game winner, to earn Big South Offensive Player of the Week honors. Kennesaw State will put their 3-game winning streak on the line this week when they host the 0-4 Texas Southern Tigers. The 3-1 Owls come in with the best defense in the conference against the Tigers' offense that is one of the worst in the FCS. If the Owls can continue to be dominant on the defensive side of the ball and force turnovers, they should be in good shape to pick up their 4th straight win, as their 12 takeaways lead the Big South. After heading into halftime up just 10-7 against Mississippi Valley, the Charleston Southern Buccaneers exploded with 48 second-half points, including 35 in the third, to blow out the Delta Devils 58-7. The Bucs scored in all 3 phases of the game, with 5 scores on the ground, 1 through the air, a 45-yard punt return TD, and a 70-yard pick 6. 2 Bucs earned weekly Big South honors after the win. Returner Taz Lindsey Jr. was named Special Teams Player of the Week thanks to his punt return touchdown, and running back Terrence Wilson was named Rookie of the Week as he had 2 carries for 106 yards and 2 scores. Charleston Southern will travel to Indiana this Saturday to take on the Hoosiers. This is the Bucs' 2nd game against an FBS opponent this season. The first was a 49-0 loss at Mississippi State. If they want a different result this time around, the offense needs to stay hot, as they are averaging 62 points in the last 2 games, outscoring opponents 124-7. The majority of the scoring has come in the run game, so if the Bucs can establish that part of the offense early, they could be headed for their 3rd straight win. The Monmouth Hawks used a strong 2nd and 3rd quarter to pull away from Bucknell last weekend. After a 7-0 lead in the first, the Hawks outscored the Bison 28-6 over the next 2 quarters before giving up a garbage time touchdown to end the scoring. It was a good defensive showing for Hawks safeties, as senior Mike Bazile broke the school's all-time tackle record, and redshirt senior safety Teddy Martinez had 4 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. The 35-13 win ran Monmouth's record to 4-1 in 2017, and this week they'll play their 4th straight on the road at Holy Cross. This is the 3rd meeting between the 2 schools, with the series tied at 1 win apiece. Both schools come in with offenses ranked inside the Stats FCS top 32, so expect a back-and-forth game with a ton of points. Monmouth comes in with the better defense, and when opponents reach the end zone against them, extra points are no guarantee, as opponents are just 7 for 14 on point after tries against the Hawks this season. That's all for the Big South this week. Come back next week for all the results and more. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Frank LaSala.
Let's get right into last week's action. Lafayette took down Holy Cross 10-7. Freshman kicker Jeff Cordenbrock hit a 43-yard field goal as time expired, and the Leopards opened up conference play with a huge victory. Colgate took down Cornell on the road 21-7. Harvard beat down Georgetown 41-2. Monmouth beat Bucknell 35-13 on the road. Yale took down Fordham 41-10. Fordham running back Chase Edmonds returned with 16 carries for 83 yards. The All-American had missed the last 2 games with an injury. Lehigh also lost to Wagner 20-37 on the road. Now let's take a look at the standings. Holy Cross is 2-3 with 1-1 in the conference. Colgate joins them at 2-3 as well, and Bucknell also 2-3, 0-1 in the conference though. Then we go down to Georgetown at 1-3. Fordham and Lafayette both at 1-4, but Lafayette 1-0 in the division with that win last week, and Lehigh 0-5, all out of conference games. In a battle of the last 2 Patriot League champions, Lehigh heads to Andy Kerr Stadium to take on Colgate at 1 p.m. These 2 teams are 5-5 in the last 10 meetings against each other. Although they're 0-5, Lehigh essentially gets a clean slate in the Patriot League heading into their first conference battle of the season. Last week, running back Dominic Bragalone had his first 100-yard game of the season, while wide receivers Troy Pelletier and Jorge Portoreal each got 100 yards receiving in the game. Also, junior quarterback Brad Mays leads the FCS in passing yards through 5 games, so the Lehigh offense is on fire coming into this important matchup. Watch out for Colgate, though, whose quarterback, Grant Brenneman, is the reigning Patriot League Offensive Player of the Week. The Georgetown Hoyas hit the road to Jersey to take on the Princeton Tigers at 1 p.m. The Hoyas are coming off a major loss where they only scored a safety, and it won't get any easier against this tough Ivy League side. Check out this game live on your Xbox, computer, or phone using the Watch ESPN app. With a win versus Lafayette earlier this season, Princeton coach Bob Sirachi moved to 10-9 all-time versus Patriot League teams after starting his career 1-6 in such games. Georgetown is 1-7 in this rivalry, with the only win coming in a 1-point game back in 2012. Since that loss, Princeton is 33-15. The Holy Cross Crusaders host Monmouth at Fitton Field at 1:05 p.m. Monmouth got up to a very hot start, and they're 4-1 on the season, so the Crusaders will have to take advantage of their home field. Holy Cross's 2-3 record looks a lot worse than it is, with all 3 of their losses coming by 7 points or less, including a 1-point loss in overtime. With a stat like that, you know this Holy Cross team could just as easily be 5-0, so they're hanging a little bit under the radar right now. Don't expect that to last long, though, with some important battles fast approaching that will show us if this team is for real or not. Fordham opens up their Patriot League season on the road at Lafayette at 3:30 p.m. Running back Chase Edmonds is only 138 yards shy of the all-time Patriot League rushing record for career rushing yards, so look for him to get that this week when he's ready to return to being back to the best FCS back in the country. Fordham has finished second in each of the last 2 years, and they'll need to hit the ground running if they want to get over the hump this season. Last week's win for Lafayette was their lowest scoring game since 2007, but the W's count all the same. Lafayette wide receiver Matt Mrazek only needs 2 more catches to take over for sole possession of second place on Lafayette's career receptions list. He currently has 161. For the Patriot League on the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Chris Fichtel.
We start with the only out-of-conference game played by an OVC school this weekend, as the Murray State Racers visited the Louisville Cardinals and defending Heisman Trophy winner Lamar Jackson. The Racers made some plays and had some great individual efforts on defense, but they were no match for the talent of Louisville, falling to the number 17 ranked FBS team 55-10. The Racers' Zachary Wade had 11 tackles and a fumble recovery on defense, and Mariko Page added 10 tackles and a sack, but they had a tough assignment trying to stop the Cardinals all game. The lone touchdown for the Racers came when Jason Johnson scooped up a fumble and took it back 23 yards to pay dirt on the first play of the second half. Murray State looks to get back in the win column as it continues conference play next week at UT Martin. Southeast Missouri got their first win of the season on Saturday, defeating Eastern Kentucky by a score of 29-10. It was only the 4th time Southeast Missouri has ever beaten the Colonels and ended a 7-game losing streak dating back to last season. Linebacker Chad Meredith had 6 tackles for a Red Hawk defense that kept EKU out of the end zone for over 56 minutes in this game. Those 6 tackles put Chad over 200 for his career, but the star of this game was running back Marquise Terry, who carried the ball 31 times for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns, earning himself my OVC Offensive Player of the Week award. Southeast Missouri is off next week before hosting Tennessee Tech on October 14th. Eastern Kentucky had a tough time offensively, except for Ryan Markish, who again eclipsed 100 yards receiving in a game. They'll look to get it going at home next week against Tennessee Tech. For the 3rd year in a row, Eastern Illinois defeated Tennessee State on the last play of the game, this time doing it in double overtime on a Scotty Gilkey Jr. rushing touchdown to give the Panthers the win, 19-16. Gilkey was the offensive star for the Panthers, running 25 times for 104 yards and 2 scores, and allowing EIU to control the ball for 46 minutes of game time. Treon Harris was 12 of 17 for 119 yards for Tennessee State, and Patrick Smith caught 3 balls for 60 yards, but the Tigers had trouble on 3rd downs, going only 3 for 14. They'll look to right the ship next Saturday when they travel to Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Illinois stays home and takes on Tennessee Tech. Jacksonville State continued its dominance of the OVC with a 34-7 win over those Golden Eagles of Tennessee Tech. Rock Thomas continued his strong running play, carrying the ball 18 times for 102 yards. And Kendrick Doss was efficient at quarterback, going 11 of 13 for 196 and 2 scores, while splitting time with Brian Horn, who was more proficient in the run game with 88 yards on 8 carries. DeMontez Terry had a big game for the Gamecocks, catching 8 balls for a career-high 160 yards and a score. While on the other side, Dontez Bird continued to be spectacular for the Golden Eagles, hauling in 6 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown. Coming into the game, Bird ranked in the top 15 nationally in total receiving yards per game, and receptions per game. He'll look to continue his strong play, along with the rest of the Golden Eagles, at Eastern Illinois next week. As for Jacksonville State, they visit Austin Peay State University next week in what now might be the most important game on the OVC schedule, because last Saturday, the Governors knocked off the number 18 ranked Skyhawks of UT Martin 7-0. Now let's get into a quick bit of history about this win. It was the first win for APSU over a ranked opponent since 2009 when they beat Eastern Illinois. It's the first time they've beaten UT Martin in 10 years. It's their first regulation shutout of a Division I opponent since 1980, and it's their first 7-0 win in regulation since a 1956 win over Jacksonville State. The offense controlled the ball on the ground, rushing 42 times for 206 yards, and the defense kept all OVC quarterback Troy Cook unsteady in the pocket with 7 hurries and 3 sacks. Jeremiah Mitchell and Gunnar Scalado combined for 26 tackles, and Mitchell had the play of the game, forcing a Cook fumble early in the 4th quarter, just as UT Martin was driving into Austin Peay territory. But the star of the defense was Jason Williams, who had 2.5 of the 3 sacks for APSU and earned himself my Defensive Player of the Week award. UT Martin looks to get back into the win column at home against Murray State next week, while Austin Peay State will try to end another streak as Jacksonville State comes to town looking to tie the OVC record for conference wins in a row with 26. For the FCS Whiparound, I'm Luke Jackson.
After an exciting Week 5 that saw the single-game reception and receiving yards record fall, Youngstown State's defense proving that they are better than last year, and the Yotes quarterback, Chris Streveler, continuing to show why he is the best quarterback in the conference, here's a look at the conference standings. The Stats FCS ranked number 11 Redbirds sit on top of the conference at 2-0. Number 2 North Dakota State, number 3 Youngstown State, number 7 South Dakota, and Northern Iowa are all tied at 1-0. Number 8 South Dakota State, number 15 Western Illinois, and Southern Illinois are at 0-1. And finally rounding out the conference is Indiana State at 0-2. Let's take a look at Week 6, starting with number 11 Illinois State, who travels to northern Arizona to take on the Lumberjacks in the final game of the Big Sky versus Missouri Valley Conference Challenge. The Lumberjacks offense has come into form the last 2 weeks as quarterback Case Cookus has thrown for 7 TDs and 677 yards. So the Redbirds' defensive secondary had better be on top of their game as Cookus will continue to air the ball out. On offense, the Redbirds behind quarterback Jake Colby's 6 touchdowns and 1,069 passing yards will be going against a Lumberjacks defense that has forced 3 turnovers and 5 sacks last week. The key to this game will be the Redbirds' two-headed running attack of Robinson and Smith, who have rushed for 520 yards and 7 touchdowns. If they can keep running the ball and keep eating up the clock, it will keep the ball out of Cookus' hands for the victory. Next, to Indiana State, where the Sycamores host the number 2 Bison. The Bison bring in the FCS top-ranked scoring offense and total defense. The Sycamores defense has to find a way to shut down the powerful running game of Dunn, Anderson, and Cofield, who have combined for 978 yards and 13 touchdowns, or this game could get out of hand early. On offense, the Sycamores will continue to hand the ball off to their workhorse running back Lamont Booker, who will be counted on once again to have a big game so they don't have to rely on the passing game that has to go against a Bison defensive secondary that has 8 interceptions already this season. Let's head to South Dakota State, where the number 7 Jackrabbits look to rebound off their loss last week as they host Southern Illinois. This young Salukis defense will face one of their toughest challenges of the season as the Jackrabbits with quarterback Tyron Christian, tight end Dallas Goddard, and wide receiver Jake Winicky combined for 18 touchdowns already this season, have one of the most explosive offenses in the FCS. The Salukis need to get pressure on Christian if they hope to stay in this game. Now on offense, the Salukis' Sam Straub has been outstanding this year with 12 TDs, but the key player to watch is running back Daquan Isom and his 301 rushing yards as he goes against a Jackrabbits defense that has given up over 310 rushing yards last week. If the Salukis' running game can get going and the defense can put some pressure on Christian, this could be an upset in the making. Now heading over to Northern Iowa, where the Panthers host number 15 Western Illinois. The Panthers offense, led by quarterback Eli Dunn, who has 1,137 yards and 11 touchdowns, and wide receiver Darius Fontaine and his 349 yards and 4 TDs, need to get the running game going, which is only averaging 82 yards per game. If they can't, the Leathernecks defense will be playing in a nickel or dime to take away the passing game, and which will leave Leathernecks Missouri Valley Football Conference Co-Defensive Player of the Week, linebacker Brett Taylor, and his 28 tackles last game, free to rush the quarterback. The Leathernecks offense, led by quarterback Sean McGuire's 9 TDs, and stats FCS Offensive Player of the Week Jalen Ackland, who set a new record for catches and receiving yards last game, look to continue their success against a Northern Iowa defense that is allowing 257 yards passing per game. The Panthers defense, led by Jared Farley and his 48 tackles this season, have to be better in the pass rush since they've only generated 3 sacks this season. Or quarterback McGuire could have another monster game. And finally, in the Stats FCS Game of the Week, number 7 South Dakota hosts number 3 Youngstown State in a game of offense versus defense. Yotes quarterback Chris Strevler has shown so far this season that he is the best quarterback in the conference with his dual threat dominance, as he has 1,168 yards passing and 10 touchdowns and has rushed for 318 yards and 7 TDs already this season. And the offense has outscored teams 73-3 in the first quarter and 132-22 in the first half. they will be facing a fast and scary Penguin Nation defense that held one of the FCS best offenses to 222 yards last week. This year's Penguin Nation defense has put up better numbers than the one that took them to the national championship last year, as they have allowed only 44 points this season, which could spell trouble for Strevler, who will have co-defensive player of the week linebacker Armand Delavade spying on him all game in case he decides to run. On offense, Penguin Nation will continue to rely on the running game of McCaster, Turner, and Alessi, which have been unstoppable this year, amassing 806 yards and 6 touchdowns. They will need to have another dominant performance to maintain time of possession like last week and keep the ball out of Strevler's hands. For the Missouri Valley Football Conference on the FCS Whiparound, I'm Brian Sullivan.
Things continued to heat up last week in the Pioneer, with several teams earning massive conference wins on the road. Marist took down Davidson 31-9, Jacksonville defeated D3 program Guilford 56-21, and the Toreros took down Dayton 23-7. Mountail Goods had a standout day in his first start with 27 carries for 193 yards and 3 scores, one of 3 running backs to top 100 yards, pacing the Camels to a 38-0 win over Morehead State. Valparaiso defeated Stetson 27-24, and Drake quarterback had a big day, throwing 329 yards and 2 scores in a 27-6 win over Butler. As we look at the standings, Campbell, Drake, San Diego, and Jacksonville remain undefeated in the conference, while Marist is still very much in the thick of it at 2-1. Butler, Dayton, and Stetson are still looking for their first conference wins of 2017. Coming up, there are several matchups to keep an eye on. Marist will host undefeated Columbia in an out-of-conference test. Campbell will look to improve to 3-0 in conference play as they host Valpo. And the big game to focus on will be Davidson as they travel to take on Jacksonville in what will be an intriguing matchup. For the FCS Conference Whip-Around, I'm David Hashagen.
In the only game of the weekend pitting 2 NEC teams against each other, Central Connecticut State defeated Sacred Heart for the 3rd time in as many years, this time by a score of 26-15. Cameron Nash rushed for 157 yards on 21 carries, and Drew Jean Jalam scored 2 touchdowns, but it was the Central Connecticut defense that was the catalyst for this victory, as they forced 5 turnovers and blocked a punt on Saturday in Fairfield. Tymere Hinton had 11 total tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, and an interception, and in most weeks would have been my defensive player of the week in the NEC. But his teammate, Gerard Kahn, had 13 tackles and 2 interceptions, including one he returned for a touchdown with 2 minutes, 37 seconds left in the game to put CCSU up 26-9 and ice the game. Congratulations, Gerard. You are my NEC Defensive Player of the Week. Sacred Heart was led by Byron Barney on offense, as he had 7 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown from Kevin Duke, who finished with 250 yards and a rushing touchdown, but also threw 3 interceptions on the day. Sacred Heart takes next week off before hosting Dartmouth in 2 weeks, while next week, CCSU hosts Penn. The Bryant Bulldogs travel up north this weekend to New Hampshire to take on the number 14 ranked Wildcats and learn that if you want to pull the upset on the road, you cannot turn the ball over early. Unfortunately, it was a lesson hard learned, as the Bulldogs fell 45-17. The first drive of the game started great, as Price Wilson was moving the Bryant offense toward UNH territory, but was halted by a pick 6 from the New Hampshire defense. The offense seemed to get off track from there, and by the time it got back on track, it was too late, and New Hampshire was too far gone to be caught. Wilson finished with 348 yards, 101 of which went to Aaron Arye, who also caught the touchdown. Tom Kennedy added 10 catches and ran in a score for the Bulldogs, who take next week off before starting conference play against St. Francis in 2 weeks. Duquesne went out of conference this week and hosted Division II West Virginia Wesleyan this past Saturday. After a slow first quarter, the Duke's offense turned it on by putting 24 on the board in the second period en route to a 38-13 win. Nahari Crawford and Kareem Coles both caught 2 touchdowns, and Chavis Rollins added 7 catches, all from Tommy Stewart, who was 24 of 29 for 226 yards and 4 touchdowns, earning him my NEC Offensive Player of the Week award. Stewart and the 3-1 Dukes will look to keep the winning going as they start conference play next week at home against Wagner. Speaking of the Seahawks, for the first time in history, they played a game against the Lehigh team located just 90 miles west of Staten Island and came away with a decisive 37-20 victory. Denzel Knight and Ryan Foles both went over 100 yards rushing and both scored 2 touchdowns. But the defense was the difference maker in this one, forcing 5 turnovers and holding a Lehigh team that had scored 27 points in every game they played this year to only 20. Quinton Hampton had 11 tackles, including 2 sacks, and David Thomas had 3 INTs. Wagner will look to get back to 500 now in that game at Duquesne next week. And finally, in what may have been the best team performance of the week, St. Francis defeated Liberty 13-7. Now, Liberty is less than a month removed from having beaten FBS Big 12 school Baylor and was at home. But the Red Flash's defense was dominant again, holding the Flames scoreless for 57 minutes and 25 seconds. Bear Fenimore had 2 touchdown throws, Cameron Lewis had 10 catches and a touchdown, and Jaimir Jordan Toney rushed for 105 yards on 22 carries. But the Red Flash's defense won this game. With 44 seconds left, Liberty got the ball on their own 24 and drove to midfield before DeJohn Lee, who had 9 solo tackles on the day, came up big with a strip sack of quarterback Stephen Calvert to ice the game for St. Francis. Through 4 games, the St. Francis defense has allowed only 2 touchdowns to be scored against them. They'll look to continue that dominance next week at Presbyterian. That's your look at the NEC this week. For FCS Whiparound, I'm Luke Jackson.
An exciting week in the Ivy League this past weekend as we saw a few marquee in-conference matchups play out and one team's incredible win streak come to an end. We start off with Yale, who's trying to keep their hot start going as they went on the road to take on Fordham. Yale came into the season as the favorites to win the Ivy League, and they have not disappointed as they took Fordham to the shed, beating them 41-10. Yale's running backs are really starting to turn some heads as the dynamic duo of Zane Dudek and Deshaun Salter rushed for a combined 230 yards on 18 carries and 5 scores. Next week, Yale continues their road trip as they travel to New Hampshire to take on Dartmouth. We go from the undefeated to the defeated as 0-2 Cornell looked to get their season back on track as they took on Colgate at home. The Big Red didn't have it in them again as they went down 14-0 in the first half and couldn't climb out of that hole as they went on to lose the game 21-7 and fall to 0-3 on the season. A big reason as to why the Big Red struggled so much in this game were the 4 interceptions thrown by quarterback Dalton Banks. He will look to bounce back in a big way next week as they take on Harvard at home in Ithaca. Keeping it with Harvard, they travel to the nation's capital to take on the Hoyas of Georgetown. Harvard blew the doors off RFK Memorial Stadium as they trounced the Hoyas 41-2. Leading the way for Harvard were the efforts of Charlie Booker III, who had 2 rushing touchdowns, and freshman quarterback Jake Smith, who threw for 214 yards in the win. They will look to stay undefeated in conference play next week as they take on 0-3 Cornell on the road. Now we take you to Philadelphia, where the 2-0 Penn Quakers hosted the 2-0 Dartmouth Big Green. The Big Green found themselves in another nail-biter as Penn went up 13-10 on a Jack Soslow field goal with 5:37 left to play. But that was just enough time for the Big Green to go on an 80-yard drive down the field, ending with backup quarterback 230-pound Jared Gerbino pushing the ball in from the 1-yard line on the final play of the game to give Dartmouth the 16-13 win over Penn. After this game, Dartmouth is now the highest-ranked Ivy League team in the FCS, receiving 56 votes last week. They look to raise that number even more next week as they take on undefeated conference rival Yale at home. As for Penn, they head to Connecticut to take on the 2-3 Central Connecticut State team. Next up, Brown took on the 1-3 Rhode Island Rams last week as they try to keep themselves above 500 on the season. The Bears, after 2 costly first-half fumbles, found themselves trailing 14-3 at halftime and in need of a big spark if they were to come back in this game. Well, they got exactly that, as they outscored the Rams 21-0 in the third quarter, led by running back Darius Days. His 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, this surge proved to be just enough as the Bears were able to hang on to the 24-21 victory. Next week, Brown goes down to Florida to take on an 0-5 Stetson team. Finally, Rounding out last week's games is by far the most intriguing matchup in the Ivy League, as 2-0 Columbia headed into Jersey to take on a Princeton team boasting a 6-game win streak going back to last season. In the fourth quarter, with 1:12 left to play, Columbia's quarterback Anders Hill tossed a slant out to receiver Ronald Smith II, who took it for a 63-yard touchdown, giving Columbia a 28-24 lead. Princeton, trying desperately to save their win streak, attempts the game-winning drive with just over a minute left to play. All that would be over shortly because with 32 seconds left on the clock, Ben McKeegan came up with his second interception of the game to seal the victory for the Lions. Columbia needed a historical day to knock off Princeton as quarterback Anders Hill threw for 400 yards and wide receiver Ronald Smith II caught 10 balls for a school record 236 yards and 2 scores. Next week, the Lions head to Poughkeepsie to take on the 3-2 Marist Red Foxes. As for Princeton, they will try to bounce back next week at home versus the struggling 1-3 Georgetown Hoyas team. After 3 weeks, we take a look at the conference standings in the Ivy League. Some interesting things you see here as Yale, Columbia, and Dartmouth are all 3-0 heading into week 4, with most of the conference behind them at 2-1. But you'll notice that Harvard is the only one of the 2-1 teams with a win in the conference. So be on the lookout for Harvard as they take on last place Cornell next week and try to move up in the conference rankings. That's it for the Ivy League portion of Football Game Plan's FCS Whiparound. I'm Ian Gridley, and I'll see you next week.